Hey, how's it going, universe? Welcome to another daily movie review. I'm Shaun from Zoobox, and today we're going to be talking about Fritz Lang's American film debut from 1936, Fury. The film is directed by Fritz Lang, written by Bartlett Cormack and Fritz Lang. It stars Sylvia Sidney, Spencer Tracy, Walter Abel, Bruce Cabot, Edward Ellis, Walter Brennan, Frank Albertson, George Walcott, Arthur Stone, and others. The plot synopsis is when a wrongly accused prisoner barely survives a lynch mob attack and is presumed dead, he vindictively decides to fake his death and frame the mob for a supposed murder. So, like I said, this is Fritz Lang's first American film. He fled Germany, Nazi Germany, to Paris, and then ends up coming to America to kind of continue his film career. And he starts with Fury. This was a big movie. This was a big MGM movie. Had big stars: Spencer Tracy, Sylvia Sidney, especially Spencer Tracy. He was kind of a big leading man at the time, as most people probably know. And this is an interesting thing. This is kind of a spiritual sequel to his movie M, his German film M, which was his first spoken word movie, his first sound movie rather. Spoken word sounds like a weird way to frame it, but his first sound film M. This is a spiritual sequel because this is about justice. It's about mob justice. It's about righteousness and right and wrong and who should be held responsible for the mob. It's actually a very prescient movie to what's going on today in today's world. It gave me something to think about a little bit, actually, just in the consideration of all the things that I get angry about that go on in the world. Like, who is ultimately responsible for it? Like, when do we kind of draw the line and say, well, kind of mob mentality, that psychological phenomenon, should we respect that as a real thing when we start adjudicating justice, when we start figuring out who should be held responsible when things go awry? It's an interesting thing. So basically, the story is like this mechanic guy gets falsely accused of kidnapping somebody and getting ransom money, and then ends up in prison. But then the rumor mill starts. All the people in the neighborhood, they start gossiping. It starts with one old crone, old lady down at the grocery store, and then it just kind of spirals out into the entire city until everybody is just assuming his guilt, and they're just looking for his blood, and they want to lynch him. This is actually based on a real case that happened where I think two guys were accused of kidnapping somebody, and it went wrong, and the people literally just stormed the police precinct, took him out of a cell, and then they hung those dudes across the street from the police station. Yeah, pretty crazy shit. So it has kind of it's rooted in a reality, I suppose. And that's all represented in the movie. As far as the intention of the crowd, what the crowd would like to do. There's even scenes where the police are like, listen, guilty or innocent, you guys don't get to touch him. That's not how it works here in America. That's not how we do justice. It's not mob rule. We have a court system. He's going to have his day in court. And it was interesting. It just reminded me a lot of today's world and how we feel about things, and internet mobs especially, because of the disassociation. It's even one thing to get mob mentality, that's when you get taken over by what's going on, the kind of mood of a crowd, you get emotionally taken over by it. But to see it online is even more kind of pronounced, because that disassociation is even greater. They're just a thing on the other side. You kind of unperson them in your mind. So when considering those types of dynamics and what we should do as humanity, this movie explores that a little bit, because like I read in the plot synopsis, he doesn't actually die. Everybody just thinks he dies, and he pretends to stay dead while the court case is going on, because the state is basically like, these people murdered this dude. Somebody has to pay for this, and we're gonna charge all of them. Basically, they're all going to be charged. They're all up for lynching, actually, I believe, is what the sentence would be. So it ends up being 22 people from the crowd. And it's just racking the whole town with guilt. And as more information in the court case comes out, the more guilty people feel. Some people that weren't even on trial kind of profess their guilt They just can't handle it anymore. They have to yell out like, I was there too. I threw rocks at him. I'm just as guilty as anybody else. Because that's the reality, with these situations. You think you know something. You think you know something from afar, but you really don't. And then once you start getting into the particulars of a person's life or a case that's going on or whatever, you realize your ability to make a fair judgment is pretty much null. It's pretty much just not there. We live in a time where we're constantly asked to do that every single day, every clickbait headline, everything, every 10-second video clip. Let's make a judgment about this person's character. Let's make a judgment about this person's life. And let's ruin it based on this 10-second clip. It kind of has that same type of flavor to it. So it was interesting watching the movie and just seeing how, like I said before, how prescient it was, how relevant it felt to the modern era. Now, obviously, in the movie, things kind of end a little differently. The guy, he's also kind of racked with guilt. First, he's vindictive and he's full of piss and vinegar. And he's like, well, they basically did kill me. They thought they did kill me. So they are, in a sense, guilty. In a sense, right? They think I'm dead. They think that they burned me alive in a jail cell. So for all they know, they are guilty. So who's to say? Who's to say? Why should they get off? Because he's going to let it happen. He's going to let it play through. And it's not until he feels he has to give a piece of corroborating evidence, and he does it anonymously, but his fiancée, Sylvia Sidney, recognizes the spelling of a word that he often misspells. And that's how she clues her in that he's still alive. And then she kind of puts in his ears like, listen, I'll never be with you. I can't be with a man that would do this. These people were wrong, but so is this. It's kind of like, the little fairy tale, like 2 wrongs don't make a right. Like I said, it is kind of a spiritual successor to one of his earlier films, M, and that film is much darker, much more serious, much more ambiguous as well. This feels very American, very Americanized, and I think there was more ambiguity originally intended, and the studio kind of just took over. Apparently, he also had tons of problems with Spencer Tracy, and also he's a German filmmaker. He wasn't used to American film unions and having to give people lunchtime. He's the kind of guy that ate a sandwich in between setups, and you just kept working. You just kept going. Not in America, my friend. We don't do that. Even famously, apparently Spencer Tracy, the crew went to Spencer Tracy because he's a big star. It's like, yo, Spence, what's the deal, dude? It's 1:30. He goes up to Lang. Lang's like, it's my set, and I'll call lunch when I think it's appropriate. So Spencer Tracy apparently just fucked up his makeup, and he knew it would take 90 minutes to fix it. So everybody got lunch. He yelled lunch, and he hated working on the movie. He actually gives a very good performance, and I didn't bring that up. Everybody gives very good performances, but I guess under the circumstances, apparently he did not really like working with Fritz Lang. And I think it was because of that. Maybe he thought Fritz was kind of arrogant, and who knows? Maybe Fritz was arrogant. Maybe he had earned it at that point. But coming over to America and trying to push his artistic weight around when he's a nobody in this city. And he said he would never work with him again. Swore up and down he would never work with him again. But, bummer for you, Spencer. Because this was interesting. It's a different kind of role for Spencer Tracy. He's not crazy and he's not a crook. He's kind of like a nice guy. Which is not something he got to play a lot at that time in his career, especially. I mean, back then he had been, unless I'm talking out of turn here, out of school, but I believe, he was more or less kind of always a crazy guy. He was always kind of the shady dude. He didn't get to be kind of a nice leading man often up until that point. So he gets this movie and he kind of just I don't know, didn't want to do it. Didn't want to play ball. He gives a good performance though. So I'll give him that. He's a professional. He showed up. Professional. And, it's got a kind of nice, it's a very Hollywood version of something that I think could have been way more interesting. Maybe had Fritz Lang had a little bit more control. Maybe if he had made this in Germany. Although, like I said, M kind of covers this territory, and it covers it very well. Not that this is bad. Fury's not a bad movie at all, and I think it's worth revisiting right now specifically, just because of the kind of larger meta conversation it's having about the world. And that's one of the cool things about art in general, right? Sometimes it grows with you. You can come back to these things and learn something new from it. You're a different person. The movie's the same, but you're a different person. And by the prism by which you view it through, it can be a completely different experience. I have to say Fury is one of those things. I saw it a long, long time ago. And I could barely remember it. So I was like, oh, I'm going to rewatch Fury. I think when I saw it, I didn't even know Fritz Lang directed it. I didn't. I was just, I was watching Woman on the Moon and Metropolis, and I was like, let's watch one of his his talkies, for lack of a better way to put it. Let's watch some of his American movies, because I'm just kind of unfamiliar with his later filmography. So it was interesting to find out that he did Fury. Made a lot of sense once I watched it, for sure, though. It is, like I said, maybe a little too Hollywood for its own good, but entertaining nonetheless. If you see it on one of the streaming services or whatever, I'd say go for it. Grab yourself some Fury and sit around with the fam. You're gonna have a great time. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to know more about Zoobox, there's a bunch of links in the description for our Facebook, for our Instagram, for my personal Twitter. Also, if you'd like to make a request for one of these daily videos, throw it in the comments section, and we'll put it on the list. All right, everybody. You have a great one.